One of, if not the most popular gaming genres, is the first-person shooter. In many of these FPS games, the player uses some assortment of long-range weapons to take out some assortment of enemies. Now, this is where the innovations found in most of these types of games tend to stop, as many games use a slight variation of these core mechanics. This contrasts SuperHot, where we bend the world to our will by controlling time itself. When we move, so does the world, and if we stop, the world follows suit. To figure out how this game innovated the core mechanics of the most popular gaming genre, let's take a look at its interesting development history. According to the game director and designer Piotr Iwanicki, most of the development came about through a challenge known as the 7-Day FPS Challenge. Iwanicki, along with some of his friends, worked at a Polish company, Bluebrick, which builds electronics and statistical applications along with doing some scientific research. Along with this more technical aspect of the company, they also had developed some flash games on the side, so they had some experience developing games. Iwanicki and his team had previously entered another game jam, the Ludum Dare, where they had to build another game. Now let's get into what the actual challenge is. In the 7-Day FPS Challenge, small studios or groups of independent game developers try to develop and build a first-person shooter from the ground up in 7 days or less. Through this challenge, Iwanicki used the flash game Time for Cat as inspiration, where a cat walks across a crosswalk trying to collect as much food as possible. Whenever the cat stops walking, time also stops moving, but resumes when the cat continues collecting its food. Using this flash game as an inspiration, along with the music video from Biting Elbows, where a special agent escapes a hostage crisis while it's being viewed through a first-person perspective. These two ideas melded into each other, creating the main game mechanics found in the original SuperHot prototype for this competition. Now, they had their main game mechanic, but what they needed to come up with was a name for the game. What they came up with was SuperHot. In an interview in 2016 with GameDeveloper.com, Iwanicki explained that he wanted the game to have two positive keywords. They are intense and they sound great as a mantra.
Super hot, super hot.
They decided to use the Unity game engine, with each level being worked on separately on different computers. Each of the developers were working in a state of pure exhaustion as they tried to complete their shooter. As the competition started winding down, they began rushing to meet the deadline. Instead of combining the 3 levels that they made into a single game, they just connected each of these levels into 3 separate Unity players, and then called each level episodic. After completing the challenge, Iwanicki and his team believed that this game had potential to be expanded upon, so they decided to rebuild the game. Once they polished the game, they released it in the form of a browser game found on their website in September 2013, where more people were able to experience this game. Along with the release of the browser version of the game, they also decided to submit the game to Steam's Greenlight program. This program allowed indie developers to submit information about their game in the form of betas and early builds. If the games that were submitted were deemed to be quality releases by the users that would play these releases, then the games would be made available on the storefront. In 5 days, enough people were interested to play SuperHot that the game passed Steam Greenlight. This has been the fastest game that was accepted into the program. After the game was accepted into the program, it was off to the races. The dev team tried to start a Kickstarter campaign for the game in order to help fund it after getting the green light from Steam. This campaign promised bug fixes, tweaking the gameplay, and mainly more levels and challenges. They also wanted to update their rushed art style into something that would be more aesthetically pleasing. Another big thing that was going to be added to this game was the support for virtual reality with the Oculus Rift. This VR headset was one of the earlier ways to delve into the world of virtual reality. The only problem with all of this was that the Kickstarter didn't support Poland at the time, so while the issues with that were being resolved, they added more features to the game along with adding more types of weapons. Once the Kickstarter localization problem was resolved, they started their month-long campaign, and within a day, the game raised over $100,000, absolutely destroying their original goal. With 29 days left in the campaign, they started to get more and more donations for this game, reaching their 4th reach goal, ending the Kickstarter at $250,798, with over 11,500 people backing the game. Each tier in the Kickstarter gave them more chances to develop the game with new modes and challenges, such as the New Game Plus mode. One thing that's unique about this game is its art style, helmed by art director Marcin Surma, who was brought on after the challenge in order to expand on the minimalistic art style found in the game. While many FPS and other types of shooters during this era tried to go for a more photorealistic look using realistic weapons, environments, characters, SuperHot ran in the opposite direction using 3 main colors. First, they used black for the weapons, or more specifically anything that can be used as weapons. Balls, cups, or even blades can be hurled at enemies. This black color for the weapon comes in a stark contrast to the world around them. The world that we play in is pure white, almost glowing. From the buildings to the trucks to even the ground we walk on is still white. The reason why there is a stark contrast between those two colors is due to the fact that you can easily differentiate between the stuff that can be used to shatter your enemies versus what's just there for show. The final part of this artistic style is the enemies, which is colored red. The designers of the game wanted there to be a stark split between the colors to show what stands out immediately important compared to what might just be window dressing. Along with the colors being very minimal, the game's polygon style coexists with it. From the buildings and vehicles to the enemies and weapons, they are made up of primitive shapes. Most of the models themselves are simplified, and not in a bland way. The faceless enemies that you face look like they were cut out of rubies. Another presentation choice in the game is how the menus in the game looks. Coming from old MS-DOS computer interfaces and command lines, Sermon wanted the game's menu to contrast from the game's 3D environment, rhyming with the way the weapons, environment, and characters are contrasted together. Along with its unique art style, the game's mechanics also stands out from this crowded genre. SuperHot's main mechanic, much like many other shooters, is using a wide variety of weapons to destroy a random assortment of enemies. But they twist this mechanic where instead of just gunning down your enemies with very little thought put into it, the enemies now move only when you do, hence the game's tagline, time moves only when you move. The single change to the game's core mechanic made it so the game was a type of puzzle. You would have to speed up and slow down time in order to weave your way through the enemies, choosing which times you would take out an enemy, grab an item in midair, or just use your fists. Once you are dropped into a level, the world is frozen in time. If you're hit by an enemy once, the level restarts. Unlike many other first-person shooters where you can run in guns blazing, SuperHot's main goal is to make you think. You need to move slow and be precise, working your way through each level. In many of these levels, you will have to use some sort of weapon, such as a rifle, a pistol, but in many other levels, you would need to use some sort of makeshift weapon, such as balls, cups, or a baseball bat, in order to go on the attack. While the variety of weapons adds to the challenge of the game, as you progress, you never really gain any other skills. Although near the end, you do gain a singular ability, Hot Switch. This ability allows you to take over an enemy's body, destroying your old one as a result. With a cooldown and dropping whatever weapons the new body was holding, Hot Switch allows for a new way to take out your enemies. Instead of directly attacking your opponents, you can jump into new bodies and jump out of them. All of these mechanics add to the game's nuances, creating an interesting game along with a thrilling meta story. When you turn on the game, the old DOS screen shows up, loading us into Pi OS, with a new incoming message from our friend on Guru Chat. Our friend begins the chat by asking if we played SuperHot yet, saying that we need to log on to the company's website in order to gain access to the game, but we brushed it aside saying that it's too complicated. Urging us though, our friend sends over the files and tells us to enjoy the game. Once booted out of Guru Chat, we begin opening the game, and once we are in, we are thrust into a bunch of random levels. A factory, an alleyway, and then a subway level. While each of these levels were interesting, they seemingly had no connection to each other. But before we could do anything on the last level, we get an ominous message just saying unauthorized access, before the game glitches out and boots us back into the main menu. On the menu, we are greeted with another message from our friend asking how the game was. Well, we say that the gameplay was interesting, but nothing else seemed to be that appealing. In fact, it was more so random than anything else, but our friend brushes it aside, saying that everyone gets something different. We then let him know about the weird glitch that happened near the end of the last level, before we were kicked out. Our mysterious friend then tells us that the company updated the game and that they would send us the patched release. Once we get the patched game, we start beating the red guys and completing each level until we inevitably get kicked out of the game again with another glitch. Once again, our friend sends us another message, this time surprised that we were playing for hours, yet it felt like time flew by. They also let us know that they added more to the game, but these levels are password protected. When trying to enter the password, we are immediately denied access. We try it one more time, this time getting accepted, and are sent into the new level. This level seems to be nothing special at first. It's only once we finish the level something strange happens. We get teleported back to the beginning of the level before a countdown appears locating the breach location, and then flashing an image of a person with a VR headset playing some sort of game. As we continue through the game, the system, as we come to know it, tries to stop us from playing it. Along with doing this, the game also fakes a fallout with our mysterious friend as the system tries to stop them from playing the game as well. Finally, the game forces the in-game avatar to head into our house. We then punch that person, and with that, it is revealed that the person we just punched was ourselves. With that, the game force quits. But due to our curiosity, we boot the game back up, and with that, the floodgates are open. More and more, the system starts to fully insist on playing the game, consuming as much content as we can. We start mowing down our enemies as we head closer and closer to some sort of lab. We find out that the system is contained in that lab. Once entering the lab, the system, called the core, coerces us into entering it, and once we become one with it, our final act is to shoot our body, ending our human life, and becoming one with the hive mind that is the core. As the game closes out, we are left with the system telling us to share the game with as many people as possible, stating to use this line: SuperHot is the most innovative shooter I've played in years. Now, with this type of gameplay, along with an interesting meta-narrative story, the game was bound to be a success, and a success it was. The full game was released to Windows, Mac, and Linux on February 25th, 2016, with the console releases of SuperHot following later that year. The reception was almost all positive across the board, with many reviewers loving the mechanics. While the campaign was a bit short for some people's taste, with it being around 5 to 6 hours of total playtime, players and reviewers loved its concise meta storytelling, along with the added bonus of new modes after completing the main campaign. With the success of SuperHot, a VR version of the game was made, SuperHot VR. This game is very similar to its non-VR counterpart, although movement in the game has been greatly reduced. Instead of moving through alleyways and office cubicles, you mainly move your head, hands, and body for time to actually start moving. Slight movements or turning your head to assess each level will still keep time frozen. Along with the slight differences in the gameplay mechanics and the campaign, the major differences in the VR version of the game were the other modes unlocked after completing the main campaign. After SuperHot VR released on December 5th, 2016, a standalone expansion of the original game was released, titled SuperHot Mind Control Delete, on July 16th, 2020. The expansion diverges from the original game, as the levels are now procedurally generated instead of handcrafted. In the expansion, the player can choose from a variety of different cores, with each core giving the player a new ability. With each additional core the player receives, the difficulty of the game increases. Now, while the developers created these games, they also created a fund allowing them to invest into indie games showing potential. Soon they unveiled SuperHot Presents, a fund that allowed them to invest into indie games that showed promise. To date, SuperHot Presents has funded 5 games in total: the Frog Detective series, Loot River, T-30, Teenage Blob, The Procession to Calvary, and Knuckle Sandwich. During the era of stale first-person shooters where the main goal was to take out your enemies with very little thought, SuperHot came out swinging. Through those 7 days, they created not only an innovative first-person shooter, but an amazing game with fantastic mechanics and storytelling. Through its meta-narrative story, we learn about an all-controlling system convincing us to play the most innovative shooter in years. This has been the History of SuperHot by the SuperHot team. If you want to watch another innovative puzzle shooter, then click here to watch the history of Portal, and make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.